There we go. All right. Talking with the Deputy Commissioner of Higher Education, Kevin McCrae. Kevin, it's been quite a journey so far here at the University of Montana in Missoula with the first announcement of budget and staff cuts that came a couple of weeks ago. Lots of repercussions, but the process is moving forward. And my question to you, as there with the Board of Regents, what role does the Board of Regents have to play, and what assistance and resources can you offer the University of Montana to help them with, the process of trying to trim the budget and also or trim staff and personnel, and also trying to reduce expenses?
Yeah, Peter, thank you. Well, from a Montana University system level, as people might know, the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education is the administrative servant, if you will, to the Board of Regents of Higher Education. And the Board of Regents is, by Montana's Constitution, the university system's governing board, the board that supervises, manages, and controls the campuses of the university system. One of the most important roles that we as a system can play is to advocate strongly for state funding for the University of Montana. And once we advocate as strenuously as we can for state funding, and we then pass along that state funding to the campus, then the remainder of the costs of the core educational enterprise are met through tuition. So a campus that is experiencing enrollment decline does not have a state funding problem, but it does have a tuition revenue problem. So for some background and context, for starters, what does the system do? We make sure, first and foremost, that we get all of the state resources that we can secure for the units of the university system to the campus, which we have done. And our track record there has been good. In fact, President Engstrom is a key member of the system team that, this last legislative session, once again, we secured record funding for the University of Montana. And, by comparison, UM's state funding this fiscal year, state appropriation, is $63.2 million compared to $52.6 million 5 years ago. So essentially, we have increased the University of Montana's state funding by 20% over the past 5 years, even though the enrollment has declined by more than 15% over the past 5 years. And we've made sure we got that funding directly to the classroom, directly to the campus. Another way of looking at that is currently, if you combine state funding with tuition, UM's revenue per student is at an all-time high as well, and that we can say is something that we've achieved through that state funding advocacy. So right now, UM's revenue is $13,800 per student if you combine their state funding and their tuition, $13,800 compared to $10,800 5 years ago. So first and foremost, what do we do? Our role is to advocate for funding, and our track record has been successful in terms of recent years, significant growth in terms of both per student funding and total allocation. Secondly, once we then get the state funding, how do we allocate it to the campuses? We have provided the University of Montana some insulation or protection against the volatility of the year-to-year enrollment declines. And by that I mean that our allocation model uses a 3-year average. Our allocation model is based on a 3-year average of the resident student enrollment. So that results in if enrollment dips, you still get a 3-year window, and so you're protected against year-to-year volatility. So that result right now is that for example, UM's state funding is slightly larger than its relative student enrollment compared to, for example, Montana State University. Their state funding is slightly less than their student enrollment, relative student enrollment. So we make sure we're providing UM some protections to gradually deal with the impacts of these changes. We also make sure that in the case that any employees, faculty, staff, administrators who perhaps could be adversely affected by some of the reductions in positions, that we have negotiated with their representatives through collective bargaining rights and benefits to make sure we treat fairly and humanely any employees who would be adversely affected. But, one thing to remember is that the impact of enrollment on the budget, it might be human nature, but a lot of people equate a budget reduction to correlate with enrollment reduction to a cut or a reduction in education. And that is not the case. So what's really going on here is once the employee numbers are achieved, once the workforce numbers are adjusted to better align with the student enrollment numbers, there will still be 100 more faculty and staff at the University of Montana than there were the last time UM's enrollment was where it sits today. So after these reductions are achieved, there will still be more faculty and staff on campus than there were the last time enrollment was at its current level. There will be more faculty and staff per student from a faculty to student ratio, or student to faculty and student to staff ratio. There'll be more faculty and staff per student after these reductions are achieved than there were at peak enrollment 4 years ago. So from our perspective, there's nothing at all related to cuts in education or reductions in education by aligning your expenditures with your revenue. And to the contrary, the way this plan is mapped out, it will allow for adequate sustainability to position the university to then move to the next phase of looking at all of the academic programs and putting a clear focus on sustainability, enrollment, student demand, and relevancy, and it will have the university in a sustainable position from which to thrive and to grow and to continue to be the tremendous flagship university that the University of Montana has always been.
Why isn't the Board of Regents treating this as, say, as a corporation would? When someone has a downturn of 3 years in a row, it's time to change the leadership. And I'm wondering, is that something? Is there a tipping point at which the Board of Regents begins to look at that option?
Well, in the first place, precision and specificity is not a bad thing when we're talking about serious issues. And the scenario that you've just painted, Peter, doesn't give us much to engage in a dialogue on. It's certainly fair for people to be frustrated in times of challenge and in times of change. It's fair for people to be frustrated, for people to be anxious, and it's easy to lead in calm waters. But the question that you're asking suggests that someone apparently has already made up their mind as to whether they are satisfied either with the Board of Regents or satisfied with the Commissioner of Higher Education or satisfied with the President of the University of Montana or satisfied with the Governor. And, there's not much we can do to change the minds of people who have already made up their minds. But we're not going to let what we cannot do interfere with what we can do. And the university system is not only supporting President Engstrom in moving forward with this plan that he has announced, but we are insisting on follow through with it and progress under it.